More people than ever before are struggling to afford the basic necessities they need to live a normal and happy life. Everything from food to cars to even houses are at all-time high prices, which begs the question, why can we barely afford anything anymore? Let's be honest, the world is kind of right now, with 65% of Americans admitting they live paycheck to paycheck and 57% not being able to afford a $1,000 emergency expense. It is no secret that most of us are struggling to be above water financially. This, coupled with the unstable geopolitical environment these past few years, caused by wars, pandemics, and poor policy decisions, it feels like there are hundreds of new issues every day affecting us. Issues that we can't afford to deal with. And while there are so many factors contributing to why things have been so financially difficult these past few years, there are three big reasons we can look at to start to explain how we got here. The first reason is the lingering impact of supply chain issues exacerbated by the pandemic and other geopolitical issues. A supply chain refers to the entire process of creating and selling a product, from sourcing the raw materials all the way to building the product and delivering it. It has been a common trend within business these past decades to globalize these supply chains for cost efficiency. While this allows for cheaper goods, the downside of this is that we become dependent on other countries for virtually everything. So, when the pandemic had pretty much every country on lockdown, everyone involved in transporting goods and materials across the world stopped working, and cargo ships with millions of dollars worth of stuff were left stranded, causing never-before-seen backlogs and huge shortages. As you remember from economics, shortages cause huge price increases as supply has gone down with demand staying constant, creating a higher price-quantity equilibrium. Now imagine a scenario where not only there is a huge shortage of a good, but that good is also rapidly increasing in demand, causing the price to skyrocket even more. This is exactly what happened with the most well-known supply chain issue caused by the pandemic, the chip shortage. With interest in consumer electronics being at an all-time high, the demand for semiconductor chips have been steadily growing, causing that much more of a price hike when chip manufacturers across the world had to shut down because of the pandemic. This shortage had huge effect throughout the economy, drastically increasing the price of much more things than people realize. One of the worst was cars, as manufacturers needed these chips to help power all of the electronics in their vehicles. This is still a huge problem today, as both used and new cars are still much more expensive than they were just a few years ago. While much of these issues have been improved, we are still feeling the effects of these supply chain problems as companies are struggling to get back to pre-pandemic levels. Tense, geopolitical issues like the war in Ukraine aren't helping either. The war has restricted shipping in the Black Sea, causing hundreds of cargo ships to be stranded in Ukrainian ports. And since Ukraine is responsible for a surprising amount of the world's food exports, these shipping problems have been greatly impacting the price of food around the world. What's worse is that these food shortages aren't the only bad economic impact being caused by the war in Ukraine, as it is also part of the second reason why things are so expensive, which is global fuel shortages. You see, fuel shortages can have huge impacts on the global economy, making everything rise in price. Based on what we talked about earlier, we know that a shortage in fuel means that the price of fuel will go up, just like in the semiconductor chips and the food. The problem is that fuel gets factored into the price of almost everything since it is the key material used in transport. So when the price of fuel goes up, it's not just gas that gets more expensive. Everything that gets transported with gas also gets more expensive. Remember, other companies need to buy fuel themselves for their transport vehicles that they use to get you your stuff. This makes the expenses of delivering their products higher, causing them to raise their prices. Even if companies don't ship their goods directly, they still use other transport services like UPS that buy tons of gas to fuel their trucks and planes. So when fuel prices rise, expect a lot of other stuff to rise too. So when Russia, the third largest oil producer in the world, started the war with Ukraine, they stopped exporting gas to most countries, causing huge shortages around the world. In 2020, Russia accounted for 16.6% of the total natural gas supply and met a staggering 45% of the entire gas demand in Europe. This is one of the main reasons why gas prices were at an all-time high just a few months ago. Another main reason contributing to gas prices is that major oil-producing countries like Saudi Arabia decided to reduce the amount of oil they send to the global economy back in June. Saudi Arabia, along with Russia, are part of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, which is an intergovernmental cartel consisting of top oil-producing countries around the world. Their purpose is for all these oil-producing countries to come together and essentially coordinate their petroleum sales and policies so they can influence the global price and supply of their product. Now, if you're asking yourself, isn't that illegal? The answer is technically yes if done by companies within the US, but sovereign governments are just that, sovereign. Anyways, Saudi Arabia along with the other OPEC members decided to slash all their oil supplies in June, contributing to the already high gas prices thanks to shortages caused by Russia. And while gas prices have calmed down a little since then, we are still clearly feeling the effects these geopolitical issues have had not just on gas, but on inflation overall, which leads us into our third point. In 2022, the inflation rate in the US hit 8.5%, which was the highest rate recorded since 1982. I'm sure you've heard that when inflation gets out of hand, like it did only a year ago, a common solution to lower the inflation rate is for the Federal Reserve to increase interest rates. But what interest rate are they raising, and what does it do? The rate that gets adjusted is called the federal funds rate, which is the interest rate that US banks pay to one another to borrow or loan money overnight. The interest rate is important because of its wide impact on the economy. The higher this rate is, the more expensive it is for banks to borrow money. Because it is now more expensive for banks to borrow money, they respond by raising their own interest rates to their customers, also making it more expensive to borrow money from the banks. This means everyday consumer products like car loans, credit cards, and mortgages get more expensive, as well as corporate projects where big companies borrow money to buy new equipment, new buildings, or whatever else. Since everything has just now gotten more expensive, many people decide to hold off their spending as they wait for interest rates to go down. This, in turn, slows down the economy, which has the effect of lowering inflation along with it. If the economy is in a rut or a disinflationary period, lowering the federal funds rate should have the reverse effect. So when inflation hit an all-time high last year, the Federal Reserve responded by steadily raising that federal funds rate to slow things down. As of making this video, the current rate is 5.25% to 5.5%, and they decided to leave it as is in their most recent meeting at the end of October. And like I just finished explaining, this high rate translates to more expensive credit card rates, car loans, mortgages, and more, which, in combination with everything else we've talked about, has made things extremely expensive for the everyday person like you and me. But you know what isn't expensive? Subscribing to the channel if you felt like you learned something today and want to see more content like this. Seriously, as someone just starting to make content here on YouTube, I appreciate each and every one of you who support by watching these videos. Thanks for watching. Peace.